We welcome you to another edition of Snap the Pigskin. I'm your host, Kedrick Stumbris. No Noah Clark this week, stepping aside for some personal reasons. Noah, we miss you. We love you. We're looking forward to be back next week, my friend. Just me at Kedrick Stumbris. You can follow me on the website formerly known as Twitter. I cover the Wisconsin Badgers for Athlon Sports and All Badgers. Here to talk to you about the NFL news of the week this week. We will also be previewing the AFC and NFC East divisions with a very special guest, Jack Goods, formerly the Buffalo Bills reporter for the Buffalo News, helping us break down the AFC East. That will be in the second segment of the show today. We'll hit on the NFC East in the third and final segment. The session with Jack, the segment with Jack, really excellent. A little bit, I mean, kind of a deep dive on the AFC East. Jack is very knowledgeable about that division. I was very glad to have him on. I sent one text message to one person about helping me with the AFC East division preview for this week, and I was very fortunate to have Jack say yes to help us out here. So thanks again to Jack Goods. You'll hear from him in the second segment of the show. But first, I want to touch on what has happened with a little bit of NFL news roundup of the first full week of the preseason and some top performers that I want to talk about real quick in other NFL news. We still have no idea what's going on with Brandon Ayuk. No idea. Don't know. Sounds like he's maybe going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. No clue. All I know is between that, Trent Williams, 49ers have some problems on their hands, and you hate to see it. You hate to see it for them. Other things you hate to see, but this one, if you're a Green Bay Packers fan, you do actually hate to see. Caleb Williams. I don't want to overreact, but I think this one might be different. I don't know that I've actually said that before about a Bears quarterback. I don't know. It might be different. And I'm going off of one preseason game. One series. But he can make throws. Saw it in college. Now we saw it at, NFL close to full game speed. This is a quarterback wearing a Chicago Bears jersey who can make throws that I have not seen a quarterback wearing a Chicago Bears jersey make before. I think Chicago Bears fans, you have all the reason in the world to be excited about your team, about your quarterback. He might actually be the special quarterback you've been waiting for. I have concerns about the defense heading into the season, and so there will be more of that on our NFC North preview episode in 2 weeks. But the Bears look like they might got a guy. Closing the loop on a couple other things we talked about last week. Michael Penix Jr. He made a solid throw as well in the preseason, in his preseason debut. Looks a little bit good, looked a little bit bad, up and down. That's kind of the Michael Penix Jr. experience so far. And if you're going to flash, but not flash consistently, you're not going to get on the field, and that's going to be a problem for him when he is as old as he is. Another fairly old quarterback who's trying to be a starting quarterback in the league is Bo Nix, another guy with an up and down. But what's really notable is the younger guy, JJ McCarthy, who looks good in his preseason debut with the Minnesota Vikings. Then we come to find out that he has a season-ending knee injury. You got to pour one out for the Minnesota Vikings, and what they do next is a big question mark, because I know the folks in Minnesota still like that roster. They were, not entirely torn up about letting Kirk Cousins walk. Otherwise, they would have kept him, but still think that they had a good enough roster to let a guy like JJ McCarthy come in, just be a button pusher, dink and dunk a little bit, and potentially make the playoffs. Now you're going to have to go do that with Sam Darnold as your starting quarterback, who, I one off season ago, I said, he will be starting games for the San Francisco 49ers before the end of the season. That obviously didn't happen. But look, he's a starting quarterback in the NFL. So never wrong, just early. Am I right? Ugh, a little bit rough. Gosh. Coming up this week in the preseason, we have one game on Thursday. That's Eagles and Patriots. Once again, interested to see what's going to happen at the quarterback position for New England. It's I don't know who's going to end up starting throughout the year there. Obviously, Jack and I get into that in the second segment a little bit here, but we're waiting for Drake May to maybe put it all together for them. But they have a live fight there with Joe Milton. We'll put it that way. No Friday game this week. Saturday, I am looking forward to this game between the Cardinals and Colts. Anthony Richardson had a little bit of a shaky start, a little bit of a shaky debut, re-debut, I should say. And you hope to see him maybe have a cleaner return to the NFL than he showed in week 1 of the preseason. I'm not calling it week 2 of the preseason. Week 1 is not the Hall of Fame game. Week 1 is the week where everybody freaking plays. This is week 2. And then we have 2 games on Sunday. That's going to be Packers, Broncos, Saints, 49ers. I guess 49ers look to see who the heck shows up to the game, who is suited up, who might play, who might be on the sidelines for that one. Who knows? Who knows? Packers, Broncos. Again, go ahead and watch the Denver QBs. Not a lot of Packers are going to play in this game. Matt LaFleur saying that they're going to take as much advantage of the joint practice that Green Bay and Denver is having before the actual game. So don't expect to see a lot of Jordan Love, really any of the other starters for this one. Maybe see them a little bit more in the preseason finale. But we're going to move right into our AFC East preview after this. If you have questions, comments, concerns about how quickly we moved through our NFL news of the week, you can blame me for going a little bit long with Jack for our AFC East preview. So that is coming up next, the AFC East preview with Jack Goods. And to preview the AFC East division that I said last season was going to produce the AFC champion. Once again, that was wrong because a certain man in Kansas City exists. I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit on today's episode, even though he's in another division. But to help us preview is Jack Goods, good friend, trivia aficionado, beach volleyball champion. Jack, thanks for joining Snap the Pigskin with us.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Jack, you're from Buffalo, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I covered the Bills for a little bit for the Buffalo News.
Yep.
Right after college, and born and raised in Buffalo. Spent the first 18 years of my life there. Still visit often, but have now settled here in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I had one text message to send and find who do I know that's a fan of an AFC East team when putting this together, and you were the very first person that came into my mind. So congratulations as our what's the word I want to look for? I guess the best and brightest of my phone contacts.
That's quite the honor.
Well, Jack, thanks. We're gonna break down the AFC East, starting with the New England Patriots. It is an new era in New England. And given one thing we love is always about every team in the division, one thing we hate about every team in the division. And I went a little big picture on New England because it feels like a team that deserves a really big picture top-down look. And one of the things I do love is the decision to rip the Band-Aid off and retire Bill Belichick, maybe for now, maybe permanently. It's not that Bill Belichick was really awful when Tom Brady was lost. This was a team that had a top 10 defense by DVOA. Each of the last 3 seasons was borderline top 5, a couple of those seasons as well. Still a solid defense out there, but obviously could never get it going offensively. If that's Belichick's fault, is that the personnel's fault? It's a quarterback league. If you don't have the quarterback, I don't know how good your offense is going to be. But I like that they have decided, all right, Tom Brady is gone. Things aren't going exactly the way we want them to. Let's do a hard reset here, a vibes reset, try to keep the fan base engaged a little bit. I don't know if the move is really anything more than that when you get rid of Bill Belichick, but that's how I feel there is upside to the move, despite him being, probably the greatest of all time. Jack, what are you making of getting rid of the boogeyman Bill Belichick in the division?
Yeah, it is strange because as someone who's watched this division since I was quite young, I've never experienced this Patriots team without him.
Yeah.
It did really feel like it was time over the past few years, and it seems like they've put together a pretty sensible plan for moving on to the next era, and Gerard Mayo seems like a smart coach. I think you have to have some question about just the Belichick coaching tree. It obviously hasn't gone well for pretty much anyone but Mike Vrabel.
Yeah.
It's been a pretty rough stretch, but it does seem like there's been, I think everyone was worried that it was going to be incredibly awkward and weird when Belichick left. It was going to be kind of like what you dealt with Brady, it felt like, where there's some bad blood. I think there is something to like about the fact that it seems to have ended on decent terms, about as decent as it can end with, the coach is really being fired after.
There wasn't zero friction there, but there was still less friction than I think I anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
It was not perfectly amicable, but nice enough. You got people there working in the building together for a very long time, people who get along with each other, but like when you develop those long time workplace relationships, that can combust in hard situations. And so maybe it says a lot about, the Patriots culture, the Patriots way, whatever it is they want to call it, that it didn't combust like that. Either way, I think it's a data point worth keeping in the back of your mind, particularly if Gerard Mayo doesn't work out either.
Yeah. And he starts with a defense that has, like you mentioned, been pretty solid, even in these down years. That's maintained pretty constant to the point where they have had chances and have upset a few of the teams with much more talent in this division. Christian Gonzalez looked really solid before he was injured at the start of last year. Obviously, the big news today with Judon is a big change to that defense and could have a serious impact. But if you're looking at positives, it kind of just feels like you have to settle on the fact that it was time for a new era. Talent-wise, I mean, it's just really hard to compare them to any of the other teams in the division. Like, clearly, this is a really uphill battle, and it might take some time.
It is, and that's why my hate for this team is it's time for a new era, but they're also not exactly acting like it is in some ways, right? You mentioned the Judon trade him heading to Atlanta. There's like some friction there between, all right, we know we're kind of in tear it down mode. Obviously, you want to hang on to one of these important pieces on, the side of the ball that you actually have talent on. But if you're not going to be willing to pay him, then I don't know why it took so long to trade him. But also, if you're in a position where you're not paying guys who are contract holdouts, why are you getting involved in a potential Brandon Ayuk trade? Particularly when that's like on the offensive side of the ball that is the side that you don't have figured out. You're not a Brandon Ayuk away from getting to an AFC title game. You're not a Brandon Ayuk away from contending for the division. So there is some dissonance there that I don't totally get. And I'll get to other teams that have some dissonance later in the show when I talk about the NFC East as well, because there's one big one there. But yeah, I mostly think the Patriots know what they want to do, but then them getting involved in these Brandon Ayuk discussions, granted, doesn't it like that trade's going to happen. It just lets me be like, but can you actually handle not winning for a while? I'm not sure that they can.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to transition to the dislike now, but it kind of ties into the fact for me that I kind of feel like this is somewhat of a just holding steady year, because I don't think Drake May is going to play. I don't think
I
you can
don't.
throw him out there with. I mean, you look at their skill positions, not to slander a fellow Kendrick to you, but with Kendrick Bourne being their most talented wide receiver, I mean, it's
Yeah.
him, Douglas, KJ Osborne, Javon Baker, Jalen Rager. I mean, and you're dealing with an aging Ramondre Stevenson. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if it's not the worst, it's got to be in the top 3 worst skill position groups in the league. I mean, it just seems to make
Yeah.
sense. You just have someone like Brissett who is very competent, just kind
Mm-hmm.
of ride it out until they start to figure out what they're doing there.
Yeah, it's. I don't know exactly what the value is in putting Drake May out there around an offensive cast that is very, very, very suspect. And it's not like Drake May is lighting the world on fire in training camp, per all reports. At least Brissett is going to hold the ship steady. I don't know. It's a weird year in New England, and I guess this first season post Belichick was always going to be weird. This just feels particularly weird, given that you also just drafted the guy that you think is going to be the franchise quarterback, but you're going to start Jacoby Brissett instead.
Yeah, it's a team in a tough spot. I mean, and they deserve it.
Fair enough. I think there is something uniquely hard about being like objectively good on one side of the ball and then just being really bad on the other. And as a team, kind of floundering, not knowing what you're going to do otherwise. It's kind of like the Philadelphia Eagles last season before their weird collapse, right? You were actually good on offense, but that defense just abysmal all year. Well, then what are you left with? You're left with a bunch of people that are really, really frustrated. And that brings me back to the beginning here, how it's so interesting that we had a very amicable Bill Belichick exit. Meanwhile, you have just some really ugly stuff under the surface brewing in Philadelphia in a situation that I think you could argue is a little bit similar, but not clearly not as much mutual respect built over the years in Philadelphia as there has been in New England.
Yeah, I think that says a lot about just the Kraft Belichick relationship, even though you would think, I mean, there's a potential there for it. Those are 2 guys that I would think have pretty big egos, but they seem to have worked together long enough to just have that mutual respect to kind of get past that. And that's put them in a position where, I don't think it's awkward the next time Belichick comes back. If he does end up coaching again, I don't think that there's going to be like weird mixed response the way that there was with Brady. I think he's just a guy that at some point it's going to end. I mean, that's just how sports works.
Yep.
It's really hard to just retire on top when you're there that long. And so it's a new era for New England. It's tougher. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of what they've dealt with for the last 20 years. It was 20 years of them really being the only competent team in this division. And now they're in a position where every other team is in a at least solid position.
Yeah.
And even if they get halfway decent, I still think it's really hard for them to compete here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a lot of time spent on a team that we don't think it has any chance to really win the division here. But it's definitely one of the most interesting teams in the NFL right now, just from a curiosity standpoint. But let's move on to the Buffalo Bills, who I just don't think you can talk about this team without talking about the Kansas City Chiefs, and it just sucks. Can the Bills get over Mahomes Mountain? It is. Man, it's got to be incredibly frustrating to be a fan of this team. And I realize now that I'm like targeting this towards you, and that wasn't my intention at the outset of this sentence, but like, I can't imagine being a fan of a team that is like consistently competing for the conference title, but just having one man be the boogeyman that stops you the whole way. Like, I guess the Packers have the San Francisco 49ers at the other end of that, but that's like a whole other ball game, right? Well, you have everything is just going to be put in the perspective of Patrick Mahomes versus Josh Allen, fairly or not, for however long here. Jack, is this the year? Is this the year they get over the hump?
I think this is probably the least likely year.
I think so too. This is a weird Buffalo Bills year for a team that is still going to compete because you still have Josh Allen as your quarterback. You have Josh
Mhm.
Allen at a cheap deal because you got to sign him at a really opportune time when the cap shrank, like, which is insane because of the pandemic.
Mhm.
So you have a very, very good quarterback on a very, very cheap deal, relatively, and yet still there's a lot of questions about this roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have Josh Allen, the window is always somewhat open.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that you mentioned the situation with the Packers and the 49ers. That's a team boogeyman where, that you could at least look at them and say they've got the talent. Where you see with the Chiefs, Mahomes is good enough to elevate a group that is not that impressive,
Yeah.
outside of Kelsey.
Yeah.
I think this is the biggest test for Allen to kind of be at that level,
Mm.
and be able to make more with less. So like Allen is going to keep them competitive all the time. I mean, he's got to be the biggest thing you like about him because he is just really transcendent at this point. And they do have some younger weapons that are intriguing. I think Dalton Kincaid is going to be really good. I was
Yeah.
really impressed with him last year. I wonder if he might actually lead them in receiving yards this year.
I don't think that's out of the question,
Yeah.
particularly when you lose the diva you lost at wide receiver. You add some other folks, but it's like, Mac Hollins, you add Curtis Samuel, like good pieces. And ultimately, I think what I like most about this team, like coming into the season and what they did in the offseason, is how they were able to kind of retool these skill positions, whether it's, signing these free agents or if it's just re-signing Ty Johnson, right? Which I think was an important, in-house reacquisition. I am impressed with what they did with the skill positions given their salary cap limitations. And yeah, Dalton Kincaid is he really could be something great that goes along with all of that. Despite their acquisitions and reacquisitions, I think he's probably who I'm most excited about
Mhm.
it from the skill positions.
Yeah, I thought James Cook also showed some real signs last year. He has a propensity to drop passes in the end zone when he's wide open, but he looked pretty solid, I think, by the end of the year. And Khalil Shakir also, I think, has a lot of talent. He's been very much in a slot role, so if he is important on this team, it's taking a jump.
Hmm.
I'm intrigued to figure out how they balance him and Curtis Samuel because I think they've played pretty similar roles
Hmm.
in the past. So I do wonder if that means that Shakir's moving more outside. I imagine there's probably more flexibility with him than a veteran like Samuel. But yeah, it's a group that they will not have a true number one. I mean, there's not a true number one
Yeah.
emerging from this. You just have to hope that there's enough here. They draft a wide receiver. I mean, I think that Buffalo may have been lit on fire by some fans if they didn't draft a wide receiver in the first round, and even still, they ended up drafting him in the second round because they traded down 2 times. After I sat there watching the NFL draft for 4 hours waiting for them to pick. But I mean, Keon Coleman looks like he's got talent, but taking a guy at the start of the second round, like it's not fair to expect him to be anywhere near what Diggs was for the Bills. It's just,
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a committee and seeing if that's enough with Allen. It could be. It could be. I mean,
It could be, right?
I'm
This is what the
skeptical.
Packers did last year. This is what the Packers are kind of banking on doing again this year. I think there probably is top end talent that maybe beats out the top end talent that there is in Buffalo, like in Green Bay's wide receiver room. I
Yeah.
think maybe the talent overall is better, but like Buffalo can repeat some of that with this version of the wide receiver room. It's not like it's an unheard of recipe for success in the league.
No, it's definitely not unheard of. And when you have a guy like Allen, he can make it happen.
Yep.
I just don't know how you can look at this group and think, oh, they're going to be better than they were
Yeah.
last year. Like I don't really think that's feasible. I think this is kind of you mentioned the salary cap, like they were in a pretty tough spot here.
Yeah.
To me, it feels like the start of a next chapter and kind of kicking off a retooling
Mm.
that may not be ready for prime time until next year or the year after.
Yeah. Well, one position that they retooled at, which gets into my hate for the Buffalo Bills this year, is safety. And it's not that I actually hate what they tried to do to retool here. I think overall, given what Buffalo could have done at safety, they did the best they could. And this is a little bit of a cop out because I actually did mention this last week as part of our like preseason preview episode, talking about one of the position groups on a team that I wanted to watch, which was the Buffalo safeties. And I still don't know what they're going to do here. You lose the veteran tandem in Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Micah Hyde pseudo retired, I guess, for now.
Yeah, he's still playing his charity baseball game in Buffalo, but that's all I've heard of him.
That's so you give Taylor Rapp an extension. I think that's a great move, but probably the best move that you could have made. You go out and get Mike Edwards, take him away from Kansas City. I think that's a great veteran free agent signing. And then you go and get Cole Bishop in the late second round from Utah. Again, a great add-on, someone that like I had on the radar as, another safety needy team from a cold weather outdoor stadium team. I think those are great ads. But now Mike Edwards is hurt. Now Cole Bishop is hurt. What do you have left other than guys that you're picking up off of the street and a somehow alive DeMar Hamlin, who has not played really significant snaps since returning to the NFL?
And one thing that, his story kind of overshadows is before that, he wasn't very good. I mean, he's an incredible story. He's an incredible guy. And, I think that he's meant so much to the city of Buffalo and to this team, but you didn't really want him to play before. And now it's even more of a question mark. But it is funny that we end up touching. I had two things written down for the things that I don't like. And it was, they've got a real position weakness on each side of the ball at wide receiver and at safety in my eyes. So, and with safety, it's compounded by, I think that they had some issues at corner last year that they solved with trading for Rasul Douglas. It was really a trade kind of necessitated by another injury to Tre'Davious White, who's now with the Rams. Right. But you're still rolling with, I would say, cornerbacks that I don't ever feel entirely comfortable with. Christian Benford, who was a former sixth round pick, I believe, is a fifth or sixth round pick out of Villanova. Kyer Elam has been a bust as a former first round pick for them. And it will bring it all back to the guy you've got to beat is Patrick Mahomes. And you don't want to be weak in your secondary.
No. Yeah, it might be a hard year for Buffalo, a different year at least. Let's move on to the New York Jets. Because the big question here is, will the Jets live up to the hype? Because we've basically lived in a full calendar year. I mean, more than that now, like a year and a half almost of New York Jets hype that we have just been sitting, waiting, twiddling our thumbs to see if it's going to actually happen. I am not so convinced that it will happen. I'm very interested to hear your take on it. But I like that they signed Morgan Moss, I guess. You had a hole at right tackle for signing a guy who's going to be 33 years old. Probably the best one you can get is a guy who has been nothing but healthy and consistent, just snapped 134 game consecutive start streak in the league this past season. I think that's a great addition. Oh no, they traded for him back, by the way. I said they signed him, but they traded for him back after they let him go to Baltimore, and then they traded for him from Baltimore. I like that as an addition. A lot of other questions everywhere else. I think Braylon Allen is going to provide a nice punch back there with Breece Hall. Overall, there's a lot of things to like about this roster. Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner. There's lots of positives in lots of places. I think Joe Tippmann is probably a really solid starting center for this team. What I find perplexing is that the hope I feel about certain spots on the roster about this team is really high. And then the skepticism that I have for certain spots on this roster is also really, really, really high. I don't know how you feel about the Jets coming into here, or if you have certain, positive takeaways from this New York Jets roster first. Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, if Rodgers is even close to what he was the last time that he played, he's got two really awesome weapons to work with in Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. I think that they're both tremendous talents. I mean, we saw what Breece Hall was able to do with nobody at quarterback last year, especially towards the very end of last season. Garrett Wilson kind of disappeared as soon as Rodgers was injured. He just really wasn't as relevant anymore, especially in fantasy. So there is something to work with there. I think that you have to question the depth here on offense too, kind of like the Bills, even though the top end of the talent is really awesome. Mike Williams is hurt much of the time. Past that, I mean Alan Lazard,
who has the fourth largest cap hit on this team, by the way.
Who, if I remember correctly, was a healthy scratch at points at the end of last season.
Yes.
Braylon Allen has, like you mentioned, seemingly through preseason looks like he's got some pop,
but also perpetually injured.
Yep. So I think there are things to like about. I mean, Sauce is awesome. I mean, he's going to be incredible for 15 years in the league, like just a really one of the top corners consistently. But like you said, I mean, doesn't it feel like this team's just like one misstep away from kind of blowing up mentally? I mean, there's a ton of pressure here, an enormous spotlight, and their quarterback is, off taking unexcused absences to gallivant around Egypt. So, I mean, I just don't think Rodgers is always talking about their need to focus on football. And then when like push comes to shove, it just never feels like this team is actually the focus. So.
Yep. I'll keep my mouth shut. You also have added the drama of freaking Hassan Reddick.
Yeah.
What are you? This team has done nothing but gotten fleeced in the trade market for the last 2 years straight, basically, because you put yourself between a rock in the hard place on earth when you had to trade for a quarterback. You then do this with Hassan Reddick. You know he was in a contract dispute. You know that you didn't have an agreement when you made the trade. And now he's like, no, I don't want to play for you either. And you're potentially going to have to give up picks to have a guy not play for you and just get mad. Yeah. Not to mention, like, you have these other holes. This is where I bring up that, like, you have so much like exciting young talent at certain positions on this roster, right? We talk about it. But then you have like ancient corpses who do not make sense on this roster at all. Allen Lazard, healthy scratch. He's your fourth largest cap hit on this team. You have somebody on this roster to thank for him being there. You have an awful offensive line, which, like, for as good as Breece Hall looked last year, if you look at the advanced stats, like the expected points added per play, EPA per rush last year on this team, it was really bad because, like, it doesn't matter if you're able to run the ball well if you are just needing to come from behind all the dang time, and running the ball kind of okay is not going to get you back in the games, and you're getting stuffed at the line of scrimmage when it actually matters. So what do? You go out and sign, like you do have Morgan Moss, who's very old, but yet reliable. But the opposite side of that is you signed starting tackle for the other side of your line at left tackle, your free agent out of Dallas. You go and sign Tyron Smith, who, like, great. I think it's a loss for Dallas, but we're also talking about a 34-year-old tackle who in the last 4 years, in 2023, played 13 games. Year before that, played in 4 games. Year before that, played in 11 games. Year before that, played in 2 games. This is not a guy who has been, for an 8-time Pro Bowler, it's not been great on the wrong side of 30 lately. So I don't know what's going to happen here when you played when you started, what was it, double-digit numbers of people were damn near it on this offensive line last year. And they're like, okay, let's go get some ghosts to play on the offensive line instead. I don't know. This is a team that I think got thrust into feeling like it should be Super Bowl contending when it actually wasn't ready to do so.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bad sign when they invest a first-round pick in that O-line too. Yeah. And you put all these resources into it, and it's still a question.
Yeah.
Kind of a bad sign. Yeah, I just think that this team, it feels to me more like a storyline team than an actual, like, will make an enormous impact in, the standings. I mean, I think that they're gonna be competitive, and I think that it will be a three-team race for a lot of the season, but I don't know if I really see them quite matching up with Buffalo and Miami in the long run.
No, I don't think so either. I don't get the direction of this team. I think there's a chance that there are a lot of people who lose jobs at the end of this season who were caught in the crossfire of really poor decisions that were actually at the feet of the ownership, but the ownership is going to have to blame the people underneath it anyway, and
Mhm.
that sucks for people who I think are actually talented in that building. Like I think Robert Saleh is not a dumbass,
Yeah.
and will be found in very welcome arms next offseason if he is looking for a job.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be if he wants to be a coordinator again, it will take like 5 minutes to find a job. I
Yeah,
think that
that will
uh,
happen immediately.
and we talk, all this pessimism here, and we haven't even mentioned the fact that we really have no clue what Rodgers is.
Yep.
I mean, he's
Yep.
41, coming off a devastating injury. No matter how much he wants to say that he was ready to play at the end of last year, I don't really think anyone believes that. I-
You'd
it
be surprised. You'd be surprised.
so I just I think if he is good, if he is like what he was in his last year in Green Bay, then this team can be good. This team could be quite good. I just think that it's going to be a lot to ask.
I think we have to keep in mind though that what he was in his last year in Green Bay was like a league average quarterback.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
true. That was
like we have not seen MVP caliber Aaron Rodgers for what is essentially 3 seasons now.
Mhm. And I think you have to wonder in that last season, if just mentally, he's never really particularly liked playing with young players. He's
Mhm.
never fed a rookie receiver very well. If just he was not really in the mental headspace to elevate what's around him, and maybe in this
Mhm.
position, like he has a weapon like Wilson who's better than anything that he was dealing with at that point. If you're being optimistic, but there's also a major injury and 2 to 3 years in between that. So I don't know. I mean, he can come out here and really shut me up pretty quick. And I'll be impressed if he does that because I think that there's a lot of adversity here.
Yeah, it's I think it's the most polarizing team in the league right now. I think it has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Because we don't know. I mean, there's a big question. It's probably the team that's the like sexiest with the least known about it.
yeah.
Last year, it just immediately, just with how big a drop off it was from him to the other quarterbacks that they had in the room, they were just immediately irrelevant. It just
Yeah.
so even if maybe there was something there, and there could have been something there, we were never going to find out with who they had to play.
Yeah. Nope, never. So we moved to the other sexy race car team, which is the Miami Dolphins, which is I think what this version of Miami under Mike McDaniel really strives to be is the sexy race car in the house. Um Problem is that sexy race car has not won a race yet. Not for the division, not out of the wild card round. I don't know what's gonna happen here. Um I think there are two position groups for Miami that I love and then I hate that they had losses at both sides. What I love is what they were able to do up front to try to replace the hole left by Christian Wilkins here. Christian Wilkins is gone, but then you went out and really tried to throw spaghetti at the wall. Throw spaghetti at the wall to fill the hole. There we go. At defensive tackle by bringing in Neville Gallimore, Benito Jones, scrolling through the rest of my list, like you brought in a lot of folks here to try and fill that void. Oh, Jonathan Harris, Deshaun Hand, Davion Nixon, Isaiah Mack. You brought in a lot of faces on the defensive line to try to fill a big hole here, which is ultimately like as again, I bring this back to my perspective as a Green Bay Packers fan. This is what Green Bay has been really good at doing at their positions of need in recent years. Think about last year. You had no idea what you were going to have at receiver. And so what do? You draft a whole bunch of guys, throw a bunch of it at the wall, and see what sticks. You had no idea. You had nothing at tight end. So you draft Luke Musgrave, you draft Tucker Kraft, hope one of them is good as a rookie, even though tight ends are usually not that good as rookies. Same thing you did at wide receiver. And now you have like an embarrassment of riches there and are talking about cutting Bo Belton, Malik Heath. You still have Dontavian Wicks, who might be your number one wide receiver, despite coming in as like maybe the fourth best wide receiver a season ago. And the Packers are doing the same thing at defensive back now. So this throwing spaghetti at the wall for the defensive front for Miami, something we've seen works in the league. And I think will serve them well this season. I mean, somebody's got to rise out of there and become a starter at least. What do you think of Miami heading into this season?
Yeah, I think Miami is kind of perplexing because we sat here at the midway point of last year and I thought they might be the best team in the league.
Yeah.
It really felt like their division to lose. And it injury certainly played a part in that starting to fall apart on both sides of the ball. And they're a team that's just so built, like you said, on that speed. And when Hill got injured, that really impacted what they were able to do on that side of the ball. We saw injuries on the defensive side as well, that to the point where they kind of felt like a shell of themselves by the time they got to that final game against the Bills, the winner take the division matchup. And then especially, I mean, who thought they were going to beat the Chiefs in the cold in that first round? Like, I don't think anybody did. And the 5 people who have Peacock watched that game just like thinking it's probably over as soon as it started. So there's still that potential there, though. Like when this team is on, they are so frightening. Like just maybe the most frightening team to face in the league.
Yeah.
I think McDaniel is a really smart coach, and he's built an offense that is uniquely designed for someone like Tua, someone who is a quick pass, being able to, he's not always going to throw out of the gym, but he can do what he has to do in that offense. And with Hill and Waddle, I mean, there's still always that fear factor with them. Hill's getting up there in age at this point, so you do wonder if maybe
when does that motor slow down? Yeah,
if the window is starting to close there. But I would think that they're still right there. If they're not the favorite, I think it kind of depends on who you ask between probably Miami and Buffalo at this point. Not to give away my overall take on the division, but I think I would lean towards Miami being the favorite, even though there are some flaws there.
Yeah, there's something about this team that just fades down the stretch over the course of the last 2 seasons that makes them a more worrying bet to win the division overall, despite the fact that I probably have more questions about the whole of Buffalo's roster. If you take Miami's EPA per play on offense each of the last 2 seasons, but segment it out from weeks 1 to 15 of each of the last 2 seasons, and then, or 1 to 14, and then weeks 15 to 18 of the last 2 seasons. You have an offense for the first 15 weeks of the year is a top 5 offense with a bullet, like fantastic. But then you take those last 3 weeks of the year, they're struggling to stay afloat as a top half offense in the league. I don't know if it's just guys wear down, the novelty of what Mike McDaniel has from the beginning of the season to the end of the season wears out. There is something that this team is building a reputation for a unit that collapses down the stretch, which is not a reputation you want to have as like a head coach who's trying to be the new hotness on the block, I guess. Probably not what you really want.
Yeah, and after that regular season finale with Bills and Dolphins, I'll admit that I spent an embarrassing amount of time on the Miami Dolphins subreddit, and their fans, they feel it. I mean, you can tell like there's a real frustration there within the fan base and a pressure that if the fans feel, like I just can't imagine how the players feel.
Yeah.
And there's still there's questions about the seriousness of this team. There are a lot of questions about Tua. I mean, I think that is where a lot of this starts. The Tua-non army is still proud and out there, but I mean, as someone who follows and watches another one of the teams in this division, I was happy that they signed Tua to that deal, and I think a lot of other people who are fans of the other teams in this division were happy about it, because I think it's really up in the air if he's worth it. You have to sign that contract if you're at Miami. I really don't think there's another option.
Yeah.
But I would not be surprised if we kind of come to the conclusion that he isn't quite good enough to get to where the Dolphins think they should be.
Well, and that guy who you already have questions about taking snaps is going to have to play behind an offensive line with 3 new starters this season. Mm-hmm. 2 of the guys you signed in free agency to take those starting spots, both of them are coming off of season-ending lower body injuries. One of them an ACL. For a guy that we have questions about around not just his ability, but his ability as a thrower of the ball, but an ability to stay healthy, mm-hmm. That's like even more questions about this Dolphins team that like otherwise might have a real chance here in a year where the division overall is kind of down. I don't know. I didn't think I had as many questions as I had about every team in this division before we started this conversation. And now I'm left just being like, oh, wait, I might think every team in this division sucks.
Well, it's funny because like I think that the Bills, Dolphins, and Jets all have the ability to be good, but there's still a lot up in the air. I mean, I think any one of these teams, if they were in the NFC, we'd be talking about a little bit differently. When you have to compare these teams to some of the teams that they're going to have to go up against, I think generally this year, like almost every team has a lot of question marks throughout the league. Like, I don't know if we have like really obvious, like, okay, this team is fine, I'm not worried at all.
Unfortunately, San Francisco still exists.
San Francisco, and I feel very good about the Lions. I feel good about the Packers. They're teams over there, and the Chiefs. I have questions, but at the end of the day, like we've seen how that works. It figures itself out in the end. So I think that this is a perplexing division where there are real flaws there, and it's also a division that features the two of the quarterbacks that were probably most worried about their health, mm-hmm. and both of them are dealing with lines that we don't really trust.
Fun. Fun for everyone. All right. Well, all of that, we've gone way longer than I anticipated to, but this has been a really fun conversation. Jack, who do you got in the division? Are you going to go full homer here?
I think I would lean Miami right now. But I think Miami and Buffalo are really close, and it's going to be a lot clearer a few weeks in just what the Buffalo offense is. If they can, you also have to factor in they went through a coaching change on that side of the ball last year.
Yeah.
A full off season and prep with Joe Brady, maybe that changes things too. Mm-hmm. And he was starting to kind of phase Diggs out of the offense to some degree anyways. So there's an opportunity to prove themselves pretty early, but I think that Miami is the safer bet right now.
That's interesting because I think of the safer bet as Buffalo, because when I think similar concerns, I guess similar levels of concern about both rosters, I default to who at quarterback do I think can steal you a game, right? When it really matters. So I think of Buffalo as the safer pick here. But man, if they are just going to have nobody to play safety at this team, I don't know how they are going to win the division if they simply do not have, they just don't have bodies at the back end of the defense right now, which makes me more concerned. But I think I'm with you taking Miami, although I also don't like Miami as the option to take here. I think it's going to be a fight to the finish between those two teams in this division to win it overall. I think Miami will have, weirdly, I am pretty confident in 3 of the 4 defenses in this division. And even still, like, Buffalo might be okay if everyone in the back end can get and stay healthy. Yeah, it's weird considering who the quarterbacks are, where I have more questions about the offense, perhaps, for a lot of these teams, considering who the quarterbacks are.
Yeah, I think it's a factor in when you're talking Bills defense too. We haven't mentioned him, but Matt Milano being back is a big difference maker. And I do wonder if he hadn't gotten hurt midway through last season, if he was out there in that Chiefs game, if they win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But you saw that was kind of a preview of that game. They were really injured. It felt like they didn't have the guys. And I was watching it thinking the Bills have to score on every possession because the Chiefs are gonna.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, Jack, thanks for jumping on. Do you have anything to say to folks? Anything to plug before we let you go?
You can follow me at Goods on Sports. I'll be tweeting up and down emotionally about the Bills as the season goes along. The funny thing about how, like you mentioned, what it's like being a fan of this team these past few years, the regular season isn't really fun anymore. It's kind of just get me to the playoffs and see what happens. But I'll enjoy this season as much as I can. I'm ready for football.
I get that. There was something very freeing about last year as a Packers fan, coming in with no expectations and just being able to enjoy the team week to week, kind of regardless of what happened, was a lot of fun. So I am joining you now with the weight of expectations once again. And yes, it is certainly a burden. Jack Goods, thank you for joining us on Snap the Pigskin to talk the AFC East.
Of course.
A very big thanks again to Jack Goods, for joining us on Snap the Pigskin this week. Well, he obviously went to longer, twice as long as I had expected, maybe even hoped to go, previewing the AFC East, but really great conversation with a guy who, used to cover the Bills. So it was going to be an excellent conversation. I'm going to run through my love and hate in the NFC East quickly before we wrap up today's episode. We're going to start with the Dallas Cowboys, who I think have a depth problem. And it maybe started with what I love about what Dallas did coming into this season, which is that the Cowboys did not sell the farm to pay Tony Pollard. It's not that Tony Pollard is not a good running back, not that Tony Pollard doesn't deserve the, top 10 running back money that he got from the Tennessee Titans. Ultimately, I think the 1-2 punch that Tennessee has with running back there is really good for them. But I think that's where Tony Pollard shines best, is as the 1-2 punch. And I don't think Dallas could have afforded to pay Tony Pollard and continue to construct the roster that it wants to around Dak Prescott, along with CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons. That's kind of been the story heading into this season that Noah and I have hit on again and again, is what is going to happen with Dallas? How are they going to rebuild? For a team like the Cowboys that has, for a very long time, been marked by top tier number one running back play. I mean, for 30 years, right? Maybe longer, frankly. You don't have to go far back. Tony Pollard, Zeke, DeMarco Murray. You barely have to go back a decade ago to where that's Marion Barber, right? This is a team that has been hallmarked by top running back play in the league behind a solid offensive line. For them to show restraint, which is not something Jerry Jones typically does, and not overpay for Tony Pollard, is commendable. However, that leaves a really gaping hole at running back for this team, and that could easily be my hate for the Dallas Cowboys. But it's more about the depth overall on this team. When you look at the running back room, you basically have Ezekiel Elliott, an old, aging Ezekiel Elliott, as the number one running back on this team. He's the top paid running back on this team. And for someone who's, this old, if he doesn't look good in training camp, he's not someone you can really cut either. It's not that his contract is super heavy, but you have to take a dead cap hit that's a little over 3/4 of the value of this contract anyways. You're signing him up to basically be your RB1. You have Rico Dowdle as number 2. You have Deuce Vaughn on this team, but there's not really anybody with proven depth in the running back room at all. When you go to the offensive line, and we talked about this a little bit during the AFC East preview, where you lose your 8-time Pro Bowl tackle in Tyron Smith. He had a healthy season last year for the most part, hasn't been healthy lately, but after that tackle, you have Juma Edoga, but he has a toe injury. You have your rookie, Tyler Guyton, who I like as a talent, but is really unproven. He hasn't played a lot of football in his career. Started playing football really late. Very athletic, but very polarizing prospect. At center, you lose Tyler Biotish. You have Brock Hoffman there as the backup, who's stepping into that starting role now. And then right behind him, you have a rookie in Cooper Beebe from, what's that, Kansas State or TCU? Not great. At quarterback, you lose Stephon Gilmore, who you got tons and tons and tons of production from last year, right? So now you have Trevon Diggs as a starting boundary corner. He's, I mean, a very well-regarded young defensive back in the league, but behind him, then, if he can't stand up and be number one, number two cornerback, all you have is rookies and former undrafted free agents. This is a team in Dallas that does not really have any depth this season. And look, for the restraint that it showed in not re-signing Tony Pollard, they deserve to be commended, but then you lose a lot of production in free agency. You didn't have many draft picks going into the draft, only 7 to make up for a lot of holes that you were trying to fill. You were able to trade back once and pick up some extra picks, but not a ton to show for it in the long run for a team that still has a lot of questions, has a lot of salary cap tied up in just a few players, and is really starting to wear down the core of the team altogether. In New York, the New York Giants. I am realizing now on my screen that I forgot to put the Philadelphia Eagles banner, but I'll put that up in a minute. New York Giants. You're going to get out of Daniel Jones at the end of the season. Congratulations. As we have talked about, this is not as terrible of a quarterback contract as it was when it was first signed. Look, he's making around league average money, around league median money as a quarterback now. It's not super bad whatsoever at the end of this season, heading into 2025. You cut Daniel Jones. He has a $22 million dead cap hit, but you're going to save $19 million on the cap cutting him, regardless of that dead cap hit versus him playing for your team. So that's good. This is a team that needs to figure out what they're going to do. You're not contending right now. You're not even close to contending for the division. But what I hate about this team, because look, you have a real opportunity when you cut Daniel Jones, move ahead, get a better quarterback, start building up, move forward. But what I hate is that this team is already acting like a contender when it's building its roster this offseason. What are you doing in not signing Saquon Barkley, showing moves that you're like, yes, we need to move on. We need to figure it out. You're letting players like Xavier McKinney go out the door, right? Pieces that are going to be cornerstones for contending teams. But then passing on the chance to draft a quarterback, you draft Malik Neighbors, a wide receiver, at 6 when you're a team that just finished 30th in team DVOA. You pass on the chance to draft Michael Penix Jr., pass on the chance to draft JJ McCarthy, and you're going to wait and hope you bottom out again and try to draft Carson Beck, Shitter Sanders. There's not. I know that. Look, I was on this podcast as a guest during the mock draft episode leading up to the 2024 NFL draft. And I think we all said, look, there's going to be a ton of quarterbacks drafted, and I don't love a lot of them. But there's not even a lot of bodies coming out of the college game next year to draft as quarterbacks. I don't totally get the move to, beef up your O-line now and sign John Runyon Jr., who I think is a good signing. You get Jermaine Illuminor, who I think is a good signing. You have these pieces around you, and then you don't have the quarterback in the room for it to totally matter yet. You had the opportunity to bring quarterback into the room for it to matter. I think the Giants signed like 5 free agent offensive linemen, which is good. Like, I think is what you would want to see for a team to support a young, potentially rookie quarterback, but you don't have that. You passed on the opportunity to do it. And after this season, when you get rid of Daniel Jones, what do you have waiting in the wings? You might get to the draft and come out with nothing. Then are you going to start Drew Lock next season? It's the long-term trajectory for this team just looks very uncertain, and it's what I would hate if I were a Giants fan right now. The Washington Commanders. Are they competent? Are the Washington Commanders like pretty good right now? And are they like planning things? Look, you signed a bunch of 1-year free agent contracts with guys over 30 years old to like plug into starting roles here, right? You signed Bobby Wagner, who's 34 years old, to be your starting Mike linebacker. You signed Zach Ertz, who's 34 years old, to be your starting tight end. You have Dante Fowler, who's making that transition from defensive end to outside linebacker, who's on the wrong side of 30. You signed Martavis Bryant, who's 6 years out of the league, wrong side of 30, but for a 1-year deal, right? Washington is not locking up old guys for a long time. You have a lot of players who are going to play roles on this team this year, but then you're getting those contracts off the books after one season. You have a team that, if you're hitting on the Jaden Daniels pick, and right now I think Washington feels pretty good about Jaden Daniels. You're clearing out room for young, talented players to come to this roster, making cap space for the future, for you to sign future free agents by not really hamstringing yourself to older players in the meantime. It's a well-constructed plan. It is shocking to see the Washington Commanders being overall, pretty competent. What I do hate though is this offensive line is questionable still. You got an in-division ad from Tyler Biotish coming over to sign with you as a free agent from Dallas, who's going to be your starting center. Solid. Backing him up, fellow Badger. You got Michael Dieter back there, backing him up at center. That seems like a solid tandem at center. But you need an offensive tackle, and you didn't draft one until the 3rd round of the draft. That's a little bit questionable, especially because from the data, we know that like the NFL can pick out top-level tackle talent. One of the best returns on investment you can have by position is drafting offensive tackle talent high. We know the guys who fit the mold of good offensive tackles, when they go early in the draft, they tend to hit at a rate higher than other positions. So then we're going to get Brandon Coleman starting, your 3rd round offensive tackle. Maybe that works. It's a lot to bank on a guy when you have, a rookie quarterback in front of him. Or you have Cornelius Lucas, who's a journeyman. And then at left guard, you have Nick Allen-Getty, who's a career backup in Kansas City. You got a lot of questions on this offensive line. A lot of questions. And that's not great. If I am a Commanders fan, if I'm a Washington fan, I am worried about putting a quarterback back there, a young quarterback who's got some legs, who can run around a little bit behind a suspect offensive line. That gives me some painful memories that if I were a Washington fan, I would rather not relive. And lastly, what on earth is going on with the Philadelphia Eagles? I think what you can hope for is that you regress to your season average. All the talk, and we talked about it a little bit in the AFC East preview a minute ago, was the Eagles collapsing down the stretch of the season. But overall, that offense on the year was 7th in EPA per play. It was 6th in success rate. 6th in success rate per rush. And now you add Saquon Barkley. It's 4th in rushing EPA per play. and now you had Saquon Barkley. Look, the team was 14th in DVOA because you had just a terrible, god-awful defense, and maybe that will regress a little bit more towards league average. Your defense will, and that'll help this team be really solid. But look, I am not one to. I am always a little bit more skeptical of like vibes analysis than others. I think a flaw of mine is that I discount like the human element of the game. I discount takes that are like, you need guys that are good leaders for the locker room. It's like, no, I want to focus on players. I discount that, I think, a little bit too much. But in this case, it's hard not to see what is maybe a real rot in the Philadelphia Eagles locker room with Nick Sirianni. There is a problem there, and there's this big ESPN expose piece on the fallout between the relationship of Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. Jalen Hurts is calling his former defensive coordinator who works for other teams now, asking, what are you seeing of us on tape? What's wrong with our offense? Not having that conversation with his head coach, his play caller. It feels like the Aaron Rodgers, Mike McCarthy fallout when we got another big expose piece from. Feels like there's something really bad there, and something that could make this team fall apart, especially when you're losing a big vocal piece of that offense. You're losing Jason Kelsey, who by all accounts does a lot more directing of that offense than a typical starting center in the league does. And so when Jalen Hurts now is going to have, added responsibility, and from that ESPN expose piece, when Jalen Hurts tries to do a little bit more than maybe he should, it doesn't go too well. I don't know. It feels bad. It just feels bad for the Philadelphia Eagles. Regardless, I think I'm taking the Eagles to win the division. The Commanders have a rookie quarterback. I'm not picking them. The Giants quarterback is bad. The Cowboys, they're just like one injury away at every single position from just not being able to field a competitive team. And the Eagles, despite how bad that defense was last year, the offense was good enough as a whole over the course of the season to like really prop it up. And maybe Mike McCarthy, pulls rabbit out of the hat in Dallas, but no, you know what? Screw it. I'm taking Dallas. I think Philadelphia is going to fall apart. That's what I'm banking on here. I don't like anybody in this division. I think it's going to be bad. I think it's going to be gross and ugly. But I'll take Dallas, I guess. I think they'll figure it out. I think there's enough top end talent on Dallas to like be the difference maker. They got look, the depth is awful, but they have some real X factor guys, and it's not that Philadelphia doesn't have that. But I really worry about the cultural rot there right now. And maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I am overcorrecting from my discounting of vibes. But that's what I think. All right, that is our AFC NFC East preview episode of Snap the Pigskin. Noah Clark will be back with us next week. In the meantime, leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it be Spotify, Apple. You can also listen to us on YouTube. Watch us on YouTube, youtube.com/@snapthepigskin. It's all one word, SNAPTHEPIGSKIN. Like us there, subscribe there for free, always free. Episode a little bit late in your feed this week, but we work to be in your feed weekly every single Wednesday. Next week, we will return to preview what division? We're previewing the AFC and NFC West next week. Noah Clark and I will be in full force, bringing you the latest NFL news. Follow me on the website formerly known as Twitter at Kedrick Stumbris. We'll talk to you all again very soon.